Welcome to tonight's presentation. My name is Lisa Dominici, and I'm the director of the Rye Youth Council. And for those of you who don't know our organization, we are a small nonprofit based in Rye, and our mission is to support the social and emotional health of children, teens, and young adults in our community. And we do this by engaging, educating, and empowering them in partnership with families, schools, and others in our community, such as Dr. Singer, from whom you'll hear tonight. A few years ago, we did a strategic, 18-month strategic planning initiative, and as part of that, we interviewed about 30 people in our community leaders, educators, cross-section parents, some students, in fact, and several areas rose up to the top in terms of need and support in our community. And one of those areas was around transition, and it was transition from the kind of academic transition from elementary to middle school to high school, and then high school to college. And over the past couple of years, we've created some programming around all of those. But one thing that we've become more aware of the past couple of years is that when our kids leave for college, that transition isn't over, not even close. And so we have been identifying ways to support our kids while they're in college. And there are many ways that we can do that. And so a lot of kids in this community spend time at home at any point during those college years. I have 2 kids who have done that, and for various reasons. And so we really wanted to start talking about it and start kind of creating awareness that not everyone follows this linear path, that the kids kind of leave high school thinking they will. So I want to introduce Dr. Singer. I think you'll find what he has to say informative. We want to definitely leave enough room towards the end for some questions and answers, and then he can always follow up with any of you afterwards. So hopefully you'll learn some things tonight that will support you and your families. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. It's great to be here, great to be presenting in front of you all. I think this is oftentimes a difficult topic for people to come out of the house for and say, yeah, maybe things aren't going that great. We were sitting here at around 5:55 and there were not that many people here. And I was wondering whether or not this was gonna happen. But I greatly appreciate everyone coming out here today. And we're not gonna go around the room and ask exactly what's going on and why you're here. That's not why we're here today. So this is more informational, get some feedback from what I've been seeing in my time in this space. And there will be some Q&A at the end to get a little bit more opportunities for you all to ask some questions of me. So I will proudly say, and I know this is being recorded, my mom will watch this and she'll probably crawl into a hole when she sees this, but I was on academic probation my first semester in college. So when I went off to college, I went to Roger Williams University. I was a 3-sport athlete in high school. I thought I was God's gift to the world, which I probably still believe that now, in which I was able to cheat on every test and quiz in high school. I was able to push right on through. Something that I've seen throughout my time in this space and as a teacher is that we care a lot about the kids who are going to the Ivy League schools, a lot of the kids who are uber successful and are going to do great things. There's a lot of attention focused on those kids. And then we have kids with IEPs, accommodations, who get a lot of support. And then you have people in the middle of the road, which is where I was. And I was able to just skate by and do my thing, and no one asked any questions. I ended up going to Roger Williams University to study accounting. I said I wanted to study forensic accounting. To this day, I can't tell you what that means. But that's what I wanted to do. My family, half of my family, they're all CPAs. I think I heard it once on vacation with all them, and they drove cool cars and made a lot of money, and I was like, that sounds pretty cool, I'll do that. And believe it or not, my wife's family, they're all CPAs. So somehow, some way, I keep getting reminded that when I started this, that wasn't gonna be where I was gonna go. So something that I think we can take away just from my own story and that I share oftentimes with some kids that I work with, that college is a lot of starts and stops. And I think as parents, and I am not a parent, obviously, like you all who have kids in college, so I can't really speak to that. I have a 2.5-year-old and a 8-month-old, so I'm not there yet. I'm not looking to put myself in your shoes, but as soon as you feel one little sliver of potential failure, I'm sure you freak out. Or think that this is going to fall away and you're not going to be able to save your kid. Here today to talk a little bit about why some little bit of failure is actually a good thing. So a few things that, just some small facts that you could have Googled and you probably have seen maybe prior to coming here today. 70% of Americans will study at a 4-year school. 30% of college freshmen will drop out after their first year of college. So that stat in itself is pretty amazing. Obviously, that's the country. That's not Rye. That's not Fairfield County, Westchester County, where things are pretty competitive, right? And I'm sure that number is a little bit different. But it's still a thing. There are a lot of kids who go off to school and don't do so great. And we're going to get into a little bit more about what exactly happens when they go off to school. So just a few things about me, and I'm gonna just click this. So prior to landing in Rye in January, I was a director at a program in Connecticut called Causeway Collaborative. Causeway works primarily with young men ages 17 to 25, failure to launch. In that space, what got me there was being a teacher coordinator for the state of Massachusetts in their prison system, and my wife said that that's not a good job for me anymore and I should do something else, so I transitioned to the private sector working with failure to launch kids. I'm a former high school history teacher in Massachusetts, varsity baseball coach, alternative high school teacher, class advisor, after-school tutor, on and on, working with kids. So I've seen kids from middle school through high school, through college, and there are some things that I have identified along in my dissertation around gaps in our education. So we provide services in career, academic, and life skills. We also provide diagnostic testing, we provide tutoring services, and post-high school planning, college transfer, gap year, and work for young adults. So our hub happens to be here in Rye. It's a really interesting space to be in rather than being a teacher where I can actually see students grow, can see them actually come home from school, talk about the good things or the bad things that are happening at school and help them really start to kind of narrow down what needs to happen for them to be successful at the next level. Can you hit, yes, thank you. You're on top of it now. So tonight's topics, we're gonna talk about ways to identify if your college student is struggling. We're gonna talk about ownership and responsibility of being a college student versus a high school student. We'll review some case studies highlighting key areas and barriers we see for freshmen and sophomores in college. We're gonna talk about resources available for parents and students alike, and conversations to have around the Thanksgiving table, which maybe you can imagine, but Thanksgiving time is a very busy time for us, post these conversations at the Thanksgiving table. And then we'll have some Q&A. Thanks. So, some of this stuff might be pretty straight ahead. And I think oftentimes when I'm sitting down with parents and having conversations about how their kids are doing and how to identify these things, some of it's good parenting, other times it's common sense, but surface level knowledge is typically where we can draw some red flags. So can anyone in the room give me an example of surface level knowledge that your kid outside of fine or good would say about school where you're like, nah, I don't really believe you? Anyone?
I'm on top of it.
I'm on top of it. It's a great one. Anything else? Yes.
Well, instead of saying good, say okay.
Okay. Yep. So I won't pause and do wait time as a teacher to have everyone else say anything, so you're fine. But what is it about those two things that are concerning? We don't have any information still. I could have said that. Anyone in this room could have said that about anything. Could have been talking about a car, could have been talking about a boyfriend or girlfriend. There is no real substance to what they're saying. Now, with being a parent, though, in this situation, it is one of the first times, probably in a while, that you no longer have access to exactly what your kid is doing. Specifically from a school perspective, and I guess we can also argue socially, living in your house, have a pretty good sense. But academically, you have Infinite Campus, you have Power School, you have Blackboard, you have all these different things that pop and tell you exactly what's going on. It's also a time in their lives where you're still overseeing everything that they do. Their schedule, their routines, going to sports, helping them talk to teachers, or you go to parent-teacher conferences. There are so many different aspects of having your kid at home and knowing exactly what's happening compared to college that I think is a very, very slippery slope for parents that is very tough to navigate. Does anyone know how to actually navigate college to get information on your kid? Because they're 18, typically. Does anybody know how to do that?
Power of attorney.
Yeah.
Power of attorney, okay.
Facebook group.
Facebook group. I said you were going to say something, yeah?
I think when they're in school, you can ask the school to have them fill out a form where you are allowed to look at their material.
Do you remember what that form is?
I don't.
So, but you're onto it, right? So.
And also their, emotional and mental health.
Right. So for schools, if you're able to, your kid can sign a FERPA. So that form is available at every school. Your kid, however, doesn't have to sign it. That is something that is up to you and your kid as to whether or not that's something that's going to be signed. But that gives you access to usually all the information that you're seeking. However, it is up to the professors, the advisors, the deans, or whomever you're speaking to still have the conversation with you. But that is usually your one access card to get the information that you might be seeking. Other than that, it's very difficult to get a real answer as to what's happening. So a lot of clients that we work with, we mandate that they sign a FERPA for us to communicate with them and their school. So they sign a release of information on our end so that we can share with the school what we're discussing in our sessions, whether that's executive function coaching, whether that's working on accommodations and ensuring that the school is taking care of what their needs are. Any of those different facets, they have to sign a release form with us, and then the school has the FERPA signed for us to communicate with them. So once all those things are taken care of, the difference is that we philosophically, and I'm sure some of you in the room as well, our goal is to not pick up the phone and immediately call school and say, hey, what the hell is going on with this kid? What we are looking to do is to coach and empower that youth with the opportunity and skill set to speak and get the information that's needed for everyone. And we are oftentimes on the call or in person with the kids at school, meeting with these different professionals. Another factor here that we can identify that things are not going that great, oftentimes we say no news is good news. This is the one time in which no news is bad news. So coming back around to it's good, it's fine, I'm on top of it, no news is not good news. The only other way in which you might get some feedback from schools as to whether or not things aren't going to plan would be maybe a letter home or an email actually comes to you regarding academic probation or excessive missing of classes. That could be another way in which you actually get into the loop around what's happening with your child at school. Next slide. So one of the, again, common sense, one of the most basic, rudimentary things to be successful in college is to simply show up. It is quite literally it. If you think about your kid in high school, middle school, elementary school, if you didn't have to deal with much of this, you may not know this, though you may know of compulsory laws, but it is mandatory that your kid goes to school, right? So that stuff was kind of taken care of. Your kid had to go to school. If the kid didn't, it was truant, and then a lot of other people get involved, and it becomes a big deal. But this is one of the first times in your kid's life that they really don't have to go to school, or they don't have to go to class. And it's a scary thing to think about, that your kid is sitting there wasting. I didn't really agree with the cost of missing the one class. That was maybe from like 5 or 6 years ago maybe, but there are significant consequences to not showing up, and philosophically across the board, if you're not showing up in life, you're just not participating, and things are just not going to go well. The one thing to be successful in college is to show up to every class, and it's pretty much mandatory across the board in every class. You have attendance policies, it's on every syllabus, it's pretty straight ahead. Show up to class. Even if your teacher says it's optional, you show up to class. There are other components to, I guess before we get on to the next slide, if you think about how many of us, raise our hands, had to wake their kid up to go to school? Once or twice, not all the time, but once or twice, right? Okay, so this time you're not there, right? And you're also not there for a lot of other things that your kid is going to be experiencing at school, potentially for the first time, right? So I think a lot for this presentation and things to just be aware of in what I'm speaking about is that a lot of this is brand new for your kid, right? It's the first time away from home potentially. Yes?
Can we use that as advice to our child if they're struggling, like just show up?
Yes.
If they're just like a very simple thing. Like you just go to class, like it's,
Yeah.
one of the most helpful things you can do, and it seems so simple.
In a lot of things, that is a domino effect of other things at school. So if they're not showing up to class, usually they're not showing up to this, they're losing this. So it's usually more than just one thing that they're not showing up for, but yes, show up is probably the best advice you could give. Next slide, please. So some things that I'm sure all of us are familiar with, but the differences between high school and college, right? We have a set schedule, there are extracurriculars. Even if you're not good at sports, you can still kind of get on a team, or in theater, you can still be a part of the theater. I'm just saying from my own experience. PPT meetings, if applicable, progress reports, report cards. You have open house, parent-teacher conferences. You see a college counselor, maybe a guidance counselor. There's a lot of support in your high school that you oftentimes are mandated to go to. And I put a question mark next to responsibility. There's a lot of kids that we see, some of our younger ones who are like 16, 17, who talk about how they have so much responsibility and it's really tough and they can't do this. Yes, there are changes to their lives in which they are a little bit more responsible for daily activities, school. Maybe you guys are having them work and they have some more responsibilities that they need to be tackling. But at the end of the day, the responsibility that comes onto a kid when they come to college is drastically different. And that's where we see a lot of shifts and a lot of kids struggling. So we one by one here. Choose their own classes and declare a major and minor. There is a lot of pressure in communities like here and other places where we work in Fairfield County, Westchester County, that there's typically one major that's best, and if you don't choose that, you're a failure. There's a lot of pressure and there's a lot that comes into our kids thinking about what they should be doing, not necessarily what they want to be doing. So the responsibility and ownership that they're taking in just deciding on a major is very difficult. Engaging with professors. This is also one of the first times that a professor really could care less, A, if you showed up to class, or B, if your grade is a C or a B, though mom and dad might care a little bit more. they actually have to go, introduce themselves, say who they are, and if they're in a big lecture hall, if they're in a smaller class size, they still need to step up to the plate and explain who they are, what's happening, and get the information that they need to be successful. You can imagine, so some of these different things, and I'm not going to get into a lot of this information, but you can imagine if someone's dealing with some anxiety or is a little depressed, a lot of these different responsibilities are going to be very difficult for someone to be able to actually follow through with at school. A lot of times parents are able to say, you're not going to hang out with so-and-so. That is a big difference in college. Thank you for the one person laughing in the room. It's a huge, huge difference socially when we go off to school. And I'm sure some of you can remember when you went off to school, you no longer have a curfew. You can do whatever you please. And as soon as some of these things like staying up too late, your sleep schedule is completely messed up, you don't make your 8 a.m. classes, that's like the biggest thing that we hear is, oh, I don't do an 8 a.m. class, I'm not a morning person. I mean, it's an absolute joke, but that is a shift that our kids often go through, that, well, I don't think I should do an 8 a.m. class because I'm not a morning person. I mean, it's just not reality. Roommates, you're no longer living with your parents. Obviously, that's a huge change. Budgeting, what you're eating, transportation to and from places, whether that's even from your room to class, laundry, hygiene, cleaning your room. All of these things typically are taken care of by parents, right, during high school for the most part. I think we can all agree most of that is taken care of. Controlling your own allocation of time through studying, video games, going to the gym, shopping, streaming, whether it's TV or whatever they're doing, and then throw on all of the peer pressures that come with being a college student and having to be your own person. It is a very drastic shift. And if you think I was very one-sided on the college side, I don't apologize because it's true. What am I missing, though, on either one of these sides that is something that you all have seen as like a major shift and or some responsibilities that came onto your kid at school? Yeah, go ahead.
Like failure in a course.
In a course?
Right off the bat, that's the other issue. Not hearing about it. As the parents don't hear about it, eventually. Because the schools don't reach out proactively, typically.
Yeah. So are you saying both or one, or the failure out of the gate or the failure of the course in general, you get an F on your transcript?
Well, the immediate, shock, which is what you're saying, but the immediate shock of managing an emerging failing situation right off the bat.
Right. Because if you remember, right, like college, oftentimes in these classes, you have 2 shots to get a good grade. Sometimes, right? You have 2 tests, and they weight, your attendance and or some homework here and there. But if you don't perform well on one test, you could kiss that class goodbye, potentially. That's not every class, but I think, yes, like how do you handle the adversity? How do you handle trying to pick up the pieces in just 1 class, 2 classes, can be very overwhelming. What else? Yeah, either one.
Communication with you, because now there could be a physical distance, like in my case, because my daughter's in California.
Yeah.
But that's all built into them being home.
Right.
But once they're gone, that there's not a formal. I mean, it's not that it has to be formal, but you need information from them. So you have to, whether it's texting or phone calls. We used to set up a phone call.
Yeah. Well said. So I think, and then we'll come to you. So something that we often do before kids are going off to college with parents, which might sound kind of silly, but maybe you can relate to a certain extent, is we literally talk about what communication is going to be like between you and your parents. What are the expectations from mom and dad? What are the expectations from you? And we try to find something in between, because it's either they want no communication. I'm going off to the West Coast, smell you, and you're like, well, I need to know what's going on. I'm paying for school, or this is like, this is an investment. I would like to know something. So it's very difficult, but that is something that we try to address out of the gate, which is a weird thought to have, that you need to have that conversation about communicating, but it's real. It's very real. What were you going to say?
So I think the hardest thing for my son was, like in high school, you see your teachers pretty much every day.
Yeah.
And you go to class every day and a lot of the work you do in class, you do homework and it's substantial, but in college, he was like, there's a lot of work outside where because you go twice a week but you're expected to do all this other additional hours of work.
Yeah, and it's not, sorry.
So I'm just saying he struggled with that in terms of, it was a shock.
And it's not like they're in high school and they're getting stickers on their assignments that they did great, but there is a level of acknowledgement that you've turned your stuff in. I saw this, you did a great job here. There is a lot less feedback that a lot of kids are like, well, I don't even think my professor's looking at my work. I don't think I need to hand this in, or maybe I don't need to work as hard on this because they don't care. And that's just not the case.
Yeah, it's a lot more independent.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Healthcare.
Healthcare.
When kids are home, their parents generally make sure they go to whatever doctor they need to go to.
Yes.
Have that influence when the kids aren't home.
Yes. Speaking directly to that, I got a spider bite sophomore year, and I didn't do anything about it. I ran a fever, and I had a big thing on my leg. But yeah, I was like, whatever, I'll be fine. But if I was home, my parents were like, what is that? Get in the car, we're going to the doctor. And it wouldn't be like me, like, oh, well, I'm not going because I don't know what my insurance is. I don't know which doctor to go to. I have to look this up. I have to do this. I have to do that. I'm also not going to call my mom or dad because they're going to tell me to go. That is a real issue as well. And even just, again, it comes back around to showing up, right? Across the board and all these different things that we're saying. You need to communicate, you need to meet with your professor, you need to demonstrate that you're there and you're available and you're looking to learn and do more. Anything else you want to add?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm just picking up on what this woman in front of me was saying, is in addition to not having a class every day, really you have not that many hours of time in the classroom, and there is a lot of unstructured time. Some people can do their work in that unstructured time, but I think when there's so much of it, I think it can be hard.
Yeah, so typical rule of thumb, and every kid looks at me sideways when we say this, but it's 2 hours of study time per credit. That is rule of thumb. No shot in hell the kids are doing that. And it is mind-boggling to think that they're just going to coast on by. And when you have so much time, if you front load or back load your classes, or you have an entire day off, what they're doing with their time, there's plenty of time to do schoolwork. There's also plenty of time to nap and do other things that aren't school related. But yes, that is a huge shift, and you don't have someone on your back telling you that you need to go study, or that, hey, studying in your bed is a horrible idea. You need to go to the library, and you need to actually find a place in the library that's good for you to study in. It is very different. It's not a controlled environment anymore, and we see a lot of kids just struggle to make it work. They get by because they're smart, right? A lot of our kids, we see a lot of kids who are getting A's and B's, but just the way in which the quality of the work, the way in which they're doing it just doesn't, it's not going to equate for better trajectory moving forward. So there are all kinds of different ways that our kids need to handle things. Can you hit the next slide, please? Thank you. So is anyone familiar with Angela Duckworth and Grit? Raise your hand if you are potentially. Okay. If you're not, I would definitely pick it up and take a look at what she talks about. So really what she's really getting at is how an individual is able to handle adversity and persevere. Just throwing some of these different batteries, and really like there's 1 or 2 different scales to throw an 8 or a 12. People that we typically see are average or below grittiness. So you either score a 5 and you're super gritty, or you're a 1 and you're not so gritty at all. And so telling you that we typically see people that are in the middle sheds some light on how much our young kids just struggle, young adults struggle with just pushing through general adversity. This isn't thinking about like they're doing their dissertation or they're preparing for some big business meeting in the city. This is like everyday stuff, just like staying focused, persevering, following through on tasks, and they struggle immensely. So I was going to share some case studies around the room, and we're going to have a little bit more. Yes, go ahead.
Are you suggesting that's a new factor, or has this always been the case?
I believe it's always been the case. I think that there are different levels of it over time. I think what we're seeing now, though, is that because a lot of our kids are more reliant on their phones and technology and a lot of instant gratification, that if we don't have it now, I don't understand that it takes 4 or 5 hours a week in one class to prepare for something, right? Like this should be done now. And if not, well, I'm just not going to tackle it. So I think that kind of lack of grit is what we're seeing. And that is habitual. We're asking for a lot of change and a lot of growth in an individual to be able to see things a lot differently in that regard. So a couple things that I figured I would share tonight that I think that is pretty relative to what we're talking about tonight. So one particular case that we got in October, this happened before the Thanksgiving table, which is great, kind of great. We got a case where the client goes to a school in Fairfield County, and that student was on academic probation and potentially failing a class. Mom found out that the son was potentially failing a class because she hacked into his email, which is great. But what we did find out was that things weren't as great as they were. They were fine. They were okay. Things are working out well. I'm going out with my friends. Things are good. What we found out through our time with this particular client is that he was stuck in his room, not doing anything, but watching screen time or watching things on his screen. He was participating in some things that otherwise are not school related. And said that he had submitted assignments when he actually did not. So what we do at Wayfinder is we have mentors who literally go to the college and literally go into the room and see what's happening depending upon what the severity or the needs are. Luckily, we were able to have meetings the past couple of weeks with his professors and deans around what needs to be done to actually move forward. And I asked him if I can quote him on this, and he said it was fine, but it's not really like a big quote. But what he said was that I didn't know that my professors would be that helpful. So throughout the semester when he was struggling and not handing in his work, he kind of threw in the towel, almost like you had suggested before, like when you fail in the beginning or like what do you do about it? This young man thought that my professors don't care about me. And this is a done deal. I'm going to get Fs, and I'm going to have to live back home with my parents come December. Now, what he had mentioned on last Tuesday was that he was able to actually have good conversation with his professors, feels more confident about getting his work in, and now he's not going to get A's. No way is he going to get A's. We're not advocating for that at all, but has an understanding for how he can reach out to his professors, how he can then also have a conversation with his parents about not looking at his email and start to pick things up on his own and hopefully regain his footing at school. A lot of our clients are typically very avoidant. I don't know if the room here has any avoidant kids, but waiting to the very last minute to do assignments and or applications, whether that's study abroad, which is a really weird thing for me to still grasp because it happens every year. Study abroad sounds really cool. I went on a little mini-mester, and to think that I could go to Australia for a whole semester sounds really cool. Sign me up right now. But even study abroad, even some of these other things that are happening on campus, our kids are waiting to the last minute, and it's very difficult to conceptualize why. But a lot of work that we're doing with our clients is around task initiation and really kind of working some executive skills around how and when to do certain things. A lot of them get stuck in the weeds of these, almost kind of like how I explained about my spider bite before, about all the different steps that it's going to take to get to the goal. I guess the goal for me was to have a healing leg, but
The goal be, before we get to this point, to have established a pattern where they can be successful from the get-go, instead of dealing with the problem after we get there, right?
Yes.
So what are the tools that we need in order to do that?
So coming back around to communication and showing up. So a lot of the examples that I was giving prior are kids not stepping up to the plate and talking about what's really happening. So how do we know what's really happening? How can we actually stop and be more proactive than reactionary? Is having real conversations. It's not being okay with I'm on top of it or that things are fine. If you're not okay with that and you're able to communicate with your kid and get in front of these things, and you can develop the skills and have actual evidence to suggest that it's going well, hopefully these things aren't happening. But yes, a lot of what we do in the practice is reactionary.
Well, if we did such a great job, we'd be out.
I'd be out of business, yeah. So there's that too. What more can I add there?
Well, I guess I'm looking for the tools that we could discuss with our kids who are in senior year right now that will help them in that process.
Senior of high school?
Yes, and so saying communication, you need to have this communication, well, we're all trying to have communication with our kids, successful or not. It's a tough age for communication to happen in general. But I mean,
Can you go back to slide?
I'm asking for some practical,
Yeah.
ways to kind of develop some of these.
Yeah, that one. Yeah. Yeah. So, sorry, hang on one second. So, budget, for example. It is mind-boggling to think that, and this might not be the tool that you're talking about, but just as an example. So I think oftentimes what we tend to do, and I even do this in my professional career, is we assume that our kids know how to do X. So in my dissertation, what I talked about throughout it was that schools take care of content, right? So ever since the Common School was created in Massachusetts, it was schools are taking care of content, they have places for the kids to go every day, and the parents are supposed to do X. Now, X was so large that it was impossible for parents to do everything. But the reason why I'm saying that is that, and this is not on schools today, but we've been doing the same thing since the first Common School, where they taught stretching and yawning, if you can believe that. And if anyone wants to see a picture of it, I have it, so just email me. But so something like budget, like we're in Rye, I live in Fairfield County, like everyone knows about money, right? And like we should be able to budget well. That's just not the case. And we often assume that they have these skills that they're being taught in school. They're not. And it's oftentimes on parents to be able to find that middle ground and be able to fill in some of these gaps. So it's budget, it's all these different things on the right. It's just a lot of stuff to cover, but these are elements that they're just not learning in school to prepare for, hey, you're gonna have to study 7-8 hours a week in college for this one class. A kid's gonna hear that and they're gonna say, all right, I'll do that in college. And then they don't, and here we are. Again, I don't know if I completely answered that, but I hope I was getting a little bit further along with what you're asking. Did I?
Is having the kids do it in high school. So in terms of task initiation, if it's engaging with professors, instead of having a parent email the teacher, have the child go and talk to a teacher, right? Like they have to learn how to not be scared to do that.
Yeah. Can we go to, I forget what slide we're on. Next one. Yeah. So you were right on cue with what you were asking. But this comes back around to almost, you must have read the presentation today, is are kids having skin in the game? So how do we teach them to do this? How do we get them to a place where they feel like they're supposed to be doing X? They need to have some kind of stake in the matter. So right now, well, I don't know everyone in the room and where their kids are, but in high school, if we were talking about, you said senior in high school? So stake in the game right now is like leave home, go to a great school, goodbye. I would imagine is most of the stake in the game, except for maybe sports or some kind of extracurriculars. Once they get to college, that skin in the game is like potentially 4 years down the line, right? They're thinking like, well, I'm going to graduate with a degree 4 years from now. There's a lot that's going to happen in 4 years, and they oftentimes lose sight of the actual goal and struggle immensely to take ownership of exactly what they're experiencing on a daily basis and not relying on mom and dad. So the biggest resource for parents is your kid, whether you like it or not. Your kid is the biggest resource that you have in helping you through whether or not college is going to plan. Now that might sound terrible or sound very difficult, but that is quite literally your resource outside of the FERPA that we had talked about before. But your kid is the resource that you need to be using during this time. You can also talk to parent coaches. We do parent coaching as well. But first and foremost, outside of any professional, the relationship with your kid and the communication with your kid is paramount. So having skin in the game, this is another book that I would recommend if anyone hasn't read it. It's literally called Skin in the Game. Talks about making tasks that are boring seem less boring. So as soon as you have more skin in the game, you feel the need or the desire to push through and talk about like some of that grit stuff that we were speaking to earlier. If you have more skin in the game, you're more likely to do X, which is usually greater than. So when I was on academic probation, my parents said to me, good luck, you are paying for this private institution. Have a great winter vacation. Let us know what you would like to do when it's time to go back to school. So my skin in the game was that I was paying for college. That was more than enough for me to pony up and get moving. That might not be the same for your kid. It might be something totally different. So we have to figure out what that carrot truly is. One more thing before we go to the next slide. So student resources on campus, they have everything. They quite literally have everything. It's going to be the one time potentially in their life or second time in their life where they literally have everything in front of them. They might have had that in high school. They might have had that a little bit earlier. But in college, they literally have everything. They have learning center, tutors, professors, office hours, academic advisors, resident assistants, clubs and orgs, maybe even private academic coaches. Who knows? But they literally have everything. Their resources are right there. We need to get them there. Next slide.
That's the $1 million question.
Yeah, they have
How do
to
we
do
get
it.
them there?
They have to initiate it, and they don't. Or-
Yeah, so yeah, thank you, real quick. So when we're talking about motivation, we're talking about engagement, the number of clients that we sit down with and ask them what they want to do, what is it all for, they sit there and they have no answer. Now, maybe that's just who I see, but there is a lack of real understanding of why. What is your why factor? Why do you do what you do? And that comes around to maybe an elevator pitch, comes around to what exactly wakes you up every day and gets you excited to go to work. We were talking about the crappy Monday that today is with a little bit of rain, and how do you push through these different things? These kids don't have that. Again, the kids that we are seeing do not have that ability to really explain what they want to do. They immediately say that they can't do this because of X, they don't have the confidence. We work on building them up, empowering them to be able to communicate effectively, even if it takes falling on your face a little bit to figure it out. So yes, having someone be able to get to a resource center when they're already failing is super difficult. But if we can instill these different things to do during the school term ahead of time, it's always a lot easier rather than being reactionary. Go to the next slide. Thank you. So, conversations to have around the Thanksgiving table. We want to steer very, very far away from the questions that give us one-word answers. Very, very far away. So, we're all smart people in this room. What are some things that you can say? You can say some things that really kind of drive more forethought. What do you like about the school you chose as it compares to some of the others you elected not to go to? So if we're talking about freshmen, all right, we can drag a little bit more information in there. I see you smiling. Is this not going to be a good Thanksgiving table?
My son just got into college, so.
That's good. So it should be good.
5 minutes before I came, but that doesn't change the conversation.
Right. Have you registered for spring term yet? Outside of them saying yes or no. How did you and your academic advisor choose your courses? Is incredibly helpful to hear. What do you like most about office hours? How does this differ from high school? Asking some more intelligent questions around college process that you're familiar with, that you believe that your kid should be doing. That's going to give you less of the surface level answers from your kids. Is there any questions that you can think of that you would like to ask your kids at the Thanksgiving table? Yes.
You could ask about clubs too, because then you can kind of find out what they're doing sort of socially. But some clubs are pretty intense. And in bigger schools, you even have to, apply to them. You don't just automatically get accepted. So it's another point you could.
Yeah, and knowing the different processes that it takes to get into a club too, and be able to get more feedback from them as to like when they got into it, what's been going on, what are the plans for late fall, early spring. That would be good. We're going to go to Q&A, so this kind of can go right into it. But any other thoughts around the Thanksgiving table that you can ask or are afraid of asking?
I think if you have a freshman or probably in a year, but with a roommate, you can ask, what sort of things do you and your roommate do together? Because that could surface up a number of issues, potentially.
Right, if you hear, oh, we watch Netflix all day. That would clue you in a little bit. What questions do you all have? That's, for the most part, the end of the presentation. What questions do you all have? Yes?
Do you have proactive? I have 2 kids that went to college, and my last one is going to be going to college. But do you have a service or a forum where you have the kids, because we're all parents here, no kids, with one exception, I think. But do you have a forum where you can talk to kids before they go to school and when they're in that first year and sense some issues a little bit more proactively? Because I think there's a value to having a parent-child conversation on the way to school and during that first semester, because I had a kid my middle son, who was very good at school, and then he went and almost failed out. We didn't know about it till later. And it would have been very helpful to have that talk before they went and during that first critical semester. Do you do things like that, I suspect?
Yeah, so again,
Is that valuable? I assume yes.
yes, it's oftentimes, I guess, so in my space where I am right now, because I'm in the private sector, I have a private practice, parents typically are not calling unless the house is on fire, right? So 100% with local schools, we do a lot of proactive work, talk about skills that they should be having. We do talks at boarding schools talking about like how to prepare for the next level. We do that, but unless the house is on fire, like we don't have the opportunity to do it. And that stuff is incredibly powerful because if we're able to get someone before they head off to school, or they had a shaky semester this go around and we're looking to like rein it in, develop a plan moving forward around, you're going to hit these office hours at this time. We look at the syllabus, right? We map out an entire schedule, how they're going to allocate their time, where they're going to go. Not be super robotic so that they despise working with us or don't want to do that plan, but really start to conceptualize what it looks like and how they're actually going to change and be more successful moving forward. We do those talks in the winter. We do those talks in the summer as well before kids are going off to college.
Are those one-on-one conversation, or are they like group sessions?
We do both. Yeah, so we do both. We do one-on-one conversations as well as group. The group ones are definitely helpful. I think what we've experienced and maybe in other areas, even like in settings like this, especially with kids, they're less likely to raise their hand and say exactly what's going on for them. And a lot of what we do is we are curtailing a program or a plan of attack that's specific to the individual. But the group stuff is really good for like rudimentary, like here's some skills that you should be having, here's like college 101, here are some things that you should consider before going off to school to be successful. And then maybe the one-on-one sessions are more, here are my learning needs, here's what's happening, here's what's going well, not so well, and attack it that way. But yes, we do both group and one-on-one. Yep.
How do you teach them to show up to class is important? Like my son is a freshman, and that's his biggest issue since high school. And he misses as many classes to the limit, to fail. He does it all the time, and then he struggles obviously, and then he's always in that snowball. And he managed to make it safely, in a very safe way, but like, he doesn't show up to class. And we've been struggling since high school.
Right. So how has it actually impacted him?
He said he's fine. I know he's not, because he's overwhelmed, because then the amount of work is overwhelming, and then he has to skip classes to get, the work that he's missing from that class, so he just carry forever something behind. So obviously it's impacting him. He's not failing, but he's not doing well, and it's because he's always catching up on all these missing classes.
Yeah, so in cases like that, there is some truth to what he's saying, which is that he is fine. Yes, we're going back to the one-word answer, but yes, he hasn't failed. He hasn't gotten the letter home that he's being kicked out of school. But, yes, but here's where we're heading, and is this how you would like to change? If not, this is what you can expect when things do go poorly. So already putting in his mind what's going to happen when we hit X, or if the things start staying the same.
That's never going to happen, because that's the way he...
Oh, invincible. Invincible, yeah.
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 So it's just me that's stressed out, that's what he said. Like, you're the only one stressing out.
But as parents, there are leverage opportunities that you can use to demonstrate that you are going to feel some of this sooner than later. And there are different levers that you can pull to do that. Because not going to class, is, again, that's what we talked about in the beginning, which which is infuriating. Like, you have to go to class. And that's going to impact GPA, it's going to impact internships, it's going to impact things that haven't hit yet. And is a sophomore now?
No, he's a freshman.
Freshman. So he hasn't felt it yet, but will feel it pretty soon on his own.
Yeah, okay.
But they have to feel it, right? They have to. Have to. Can't rescue. Yeah.
What do you, I mean, I don't have a kid in college yet, but I have a high schooler who's struggling being on time. So how do you give consequences? Like, where do you draw the line in a case like that? For example, you say, well, if you don't have these kind of grades, or you don't get by, then we'll take you out, because you're still financing your kids' school.
At a private school.
Yeah, the parents are still paying, right? So what can you do? What can you use as a tool to tell them this is where the consequence is going to be? And even if it's, falling on their face, that's maybe the way they have to learn.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times, and I don't know the situation to its fullest, but a lot of times those conversations just aren't even touched, right? So maybe that I don't know what the conversations are like at home, but we need to introduce these topics before we pull certain levers. And I think a lot of times our kids just believe that this is status quo, this is normal, this is going fine, I'm just going to continue to do this. But if you truly do not feel that way, and every household is different, there are different things that we can pull for your kid to feel some more consequences regarding whether it's studying on days that they're supposed to be studying, going to school. There are plenty of things that you can do as a parent. I just think that those thoughts are very scary and are kind of the last things, not saying that this is a house is on fire kind of thing, but it's difficult to see yourself in a different light with your kid putting significant consequences on their actions.
But can you discuss it before they go to school, maybe? Before 100%. They go to college, and then have an agreement, like, if you don't have certain results, not that you need like all A results or something, but like,
realistic goals, and straight A's isn't necessarily realistic, but yes, having a conversation with them before they head off to school. Hey, this is what we want to see. If we're not seeing this during X time, we need to have a conversation about this and talk about next steps from here as to either how we're going to resolve it, or B, what we're going to be doing because we're not meeting those expectations. Yeah. It does feel a little bit more like a business transaction, which kind of stinks. But they otherwise don't have consequences for what they're doing until they're home in your house and you're paying the consequences of having them at home.
Well, they can still continue if they get a sense of, okay, this is really going to affect me. Maybe they have to find themselves first, and they were not happy where they were.
Right.
So maybe it was not the right place for them.
But those are important questions that maybe will lead to someone who takes more pride in what they're doing and actually showing up and going. What were you going to say?
I think the MO of this community is that all kids graduate from high school, they go to a 4-year school, they live away from home, and I have an older son, and that doesn't work for everybody. And I see them all, they come back, go to Westchester Community College, go to St. Purchase, go back to another school. There's a lot of movement around because the kids were not really ready, I think, and didn't know what they wanted and didn't see, what they wanted to do in college before they went. And so my question is, what are some red flags that you think are indicative that a child is not really ready, either to go away to the 4-year school, to go to school at all, to take a gap year, to work?
Yeah.
What are the red flags?
If your child is a passenger to the process, number one, outside of the surface level stuff we talked about before, if you feel like you are holding up this boulder, your kid should not go to school. But what typically happens is that parents will say, well, you're going. And we got dad now holding, we got the freshman in high school holding for you. If your kid is a passenger to the process, they should not go. Now, no one that I've ever said that to looked at me and goes, okay, they're not going to school. Okay? No one. Regardless of how many meetings we had, they all went. And they went up in flames, and they came back around this time of year with, "You were right." Okay, great, but now we have someone who's full of shame, who's depressed, who has no confidence, who doesn't think that they can be a student, let alone they had like a 3.7 GPA in high school, like a bright kid who now is just wiping the floor.
And I've seen it happen many times. I've had it happen personally. So I think that there's something that goes on that really isn't working. And so how do you address that? I mean,
so part of addressing it is in which we, as a parent, if you're going to make that decision that your kid's not going to school, what is your kid going to do, right? And a lot of parents freak out that, well, what else do they're going to school. There's nothing else for them here. There's plenty for them to do, plenty. They can take a couple classes. They can even take a couple classes in the city at Fordham or you name it. Be a visiting student, take a couple classes and work, get some real life experience, and better understand like what they want to do, try different things. It's just not the sexy option that parents want to talk about with their friends about what their kids are doing, and it brings a lot of pressure on everyone for the kid to just go to school and figure it out.
How much do you think we should be involved in? I mean, there are pressures at school that isn't work related, right? There's the roommate, there's the social circle that they've gone into, there's stresses involved in some of that stuff. How much should we be involved in that process? So for instance, let's say, God forbid, they land with a roommate that's just, night and day with them and it doesn't work. Do you as a parent then proactively try to get that situation changed? Do you recommend that, or do you suggest that they survive that semester and find a different roommate next time? I mean, what's the best course of?
Your answer is coming from your kid. So at the end of the day, your kid needs to be able to endorse what that decision is going to be, which you might be able to say at the end of it, "I told you so." Unless we're talking significant safety issues that you are very much aware of. Don't know the situation that you're speaking to or maybe hypothetically, but I'm just saying, like, if it's not like dire straits and there's a real significant emergency or safety issue in it, your kid has to endorse that plan of what's going to happen, and you can be a part of that conversation, but you need to support what exactly your kid would like to do.
The action should be driven by what they do, that they should actually make that action instead of us stepping in and trying to manage that course.
You're more than welcome to provide your feedback, obviously, as to like why you don't think that this is a good idea in X, Y, Z. But at the end of the day, it's going to be their decision. The values that you've given throughout their life hopefully will play out in how they interact with school and everything else around them. But they need to be taking ownership of that next step of whatever that decision may be.
Having gone through this, I think one of the things I reminded our son about all the time is all the resources that are there at the college, which they have never experienced, they've never known. You mean I can go in and somebody's going to help me with my roommate? Yeah. Here's what it says in the book. In the book. So there's just telling them, go do something about it.
Yeah, as a former resident assistant, like, that's what they're there for.
Yeah.
They're primarily there for roommate conflict. Yes?
You mentioned that 30% of the incoming freshmen basically drop out.
Yeah.
That sounds actually alarming to me. I never knew that's that high. Do you know that has been always that high, or maybe there's just an increase in that?
It's been that way since at least 2014.
I'm sorry, what did you say, 30% of what?
Of freshmen drop out.
Permanently or?
That stat is permanently.
that's across the country.
Yeah, I know, but wow. What
Maybe
happens
more
with free
passengers?
college?
I
Just
like
about
to
100%.
Say that again?
I just wondered why that is, just to find out, just the solutions, maybe. there are more passengers, like as you mentioned, you know, students being the passengers, so the kids are just not mature enough somehow, parents are spoiling the kids.
Well, think about the process, right? So who is actually determining or speaking to you and your kids about whether or not this school is a good place for your kid? Yes, maybe you hire some college consultants to help. The goal is typically to get to the best school, typically. You get to the best school and it's not the best school for you. And when that happens, you come home. That best school isn't going to consult with you about next steps and figure out like the next best school for you. So you're stuck. And it's a very difficult place to be. And there are little to no resources there to help you move forward. And it's very, very damning to be in that position. But there are opportunities to learn more about what you can be doing and transfer the amount of, we say we do college processes at the office. A lot of it is really more of transfer processes. So, and that's really kind of like special work to take different transcripts that are kind of messy and figure out what schools will help them, you know, get back on track, and have classes that will come to be, you know, equivalent to a degree over here. And it's a big puzzle in helping them get back on track in a place where they'll actually succeed. That go around is really cool work. Any other questions? Yes.
I suspect you're quite busy in your practice.
Yes. Yes, busy in a good way. But I'd like to run myself out of business, as you mentioned before. But I really appreciate everyone being here tonight, and any questions, any follow-up, happy to talk. Thank you again for your attendance. It really means a lot. Thank you.